I never imagined my life would shatter in just one day. Growing up in Boston's affluent suburbs, I had what most would consider the perfect childhood. I'm Nathan, 29 now, but this nightmare began when I was 23. My father was a prominent investment banker at a prestigious firm in downtown Boston, bringing home the kind of salary that afforded us vacations in the Hamptons and a house that looked like it belonged in Architectural Digest. My mother, a former marketing executive, had transitioned to part-time consulting, but primarily focused on maintaining our family's social standing in the community. She served on charity boards, hosted elaborate dinner parties, and made sure our Christmas cards looked straight out of a magazine. I was their biological son, the pride and joy, the boy who seemed to excel at everything without much effort. Straight A's came naturally. I was captain of the lacrosse team, and universities were practically begging me to attend with scholarship offers piling up. Looking back, I wasn't perfect by any stretch. I snuck out occasionally, attended some parties that got a little wild, and tested boundaries like any teenager. But nothing that would seriously worry my parents or damage our family's reputation. Everything changed when I was 11, and my parents decided to foster a young girl named Emma. She was 4 when she first arrived, a tiny thing with these piercing blue eyes and blonde curls that had everyone immediately charmed. My parents had always wanted a daughter, and after medical complications made that impossible biologically, fostering seemed like the perfect solution. The adjustment wasn't easy for me. Suddenly, I wasn't the center of attention anymore. Every conversation revolved around Emma, Emma's first day of school, Emma's dance recital, Emma's art project that made her teacher cry. I'll admit I was jealous, and probably not the kindest brother at first. I'd hide her toys, accidentally bump into her, or ignore her when she tried to play with me. It was childish, but I was a child dealing with a massive shift in my family dynamic. As we grew older, our relationship improved significantly. We developed what I thought was a normal sibling bond. Occasional bickering, but an underlying loyalty. When she was in 2nd grade, some kid kept pulling her pigtails and pushing her during recess. I was in 8th grade then, and I remember walking her to elementary school one morning and having a very pointed conversation with the little bully. No one bothered Emma after that. I even taught her some basic self-defense moves, showing her how to throw a proper punch if she ever truly needed it. I genuinely thought I was being a good big brother. By my senior year at Northeastern University, everything in my life seemed perfectly aligned for success. I maintained a 3.9 GPA in business administration with a minor in finance, held the position of captain on our Division II lacrosse team with serious prospects for going pro, and had built a network of loyal friends who had my back through anything. I'd developed a disciplined gym routine since high school that had transformed me into peak physical condition, benching 315 pounds for reps, squatting 405, maintaining visible abs year-round. Not trying to sound vain, but this context is important for understanding how drastically my life changed later. I dated occasionally throughout college, had a few serious relationships, but nothing that stuck. My focus remained primarily on my future. With my father's extensive connections in the financial sector, I was already lined up for a management training program at one of Boston's most prestigious investment firms after graduation. My path seemed crystal clear. Finish school with honors, possibly play professional lacrosse for a few years if the opportunity arose, then settle into a lucrative finance career, eventually finding the right woman, starting a family, and living the American dream. That was the plan anyway. A plan that would be completely obliterated by a single accusation. Emma was 16 by then, a junior in high school with a passion for theater and photography. She developed into this artistic, sensitive teenager who always seemed to be involved in some school production or working on elaborate photography projects. We had what I considered a normal sibling relationship. We'd catch dinner together when I visited home during breaks, share stories about school, and generally stay updated on each other's lives. But looking back, there were warning signs I completely missed. The way her expression would tighten when my parents would brag about my lacrosse scholarship offers at family gatherings. How she'd make subtle comments about how everything came so easily to me while she had to work twice as hard for half the recognition. The occasional elaborate stories she'd tell about things that happened at school that seemed too dramatic to be entirely true. But hindsight is 20/20, right? At the time, I just chalked it up to normal teenage angst and the natural comparison that happens between siblings. I never imagined she was building up resentment so deep that it would eventually explode in the most devastating way possible. It was an ordinary Wednesday in November of my senior year. I had just finished an especially brutal practice session where our coach had driven us to exhaustion after we'd lost an important game to our rivals the previous weekend. My muscles were screaming, my shoulder ached from too many drills, but it was that satisfying kind of pain that comes from pushing your body to its limits. I showered, changed into jeans and a hoodie, and checked my phone on the way to my car, a used Jeep Wrangler my parents had helped me purchase for my 21st birthday. What I saw made my heart stop. 42 missed calls and dozens of text messages, all from family members and close family friends. Messages like, "How could you?" and "You're dead to us" filled my screen. My first panicked thought was that someone had died, maybe my grandparents or a close family friend. I immediately called my father, my hands shaking so badly I could barely press the button. When he answered, his voice was unlike anything I'd ever heard before. Cold, detached, and filled with a quiet fury that chilled me to the bone. "Get home now," he said flatly. "Don't go anywhere else. Don't talk to anyone." Then he hung up. I stood frozen in the parking lot, staring at my phone in confusion and growing dread. I tried calling my mother, but she didn't answer. I called my best friend from high school who still lived near my parents. No response from him either. It was as if everyone in my life had simultaneously decided I was radioactive. I drove the 30 minutes home in a daze, my stomach twisted into knots, trying desperately to understand what catastrophe could have possibly occurred. When I pulled into our driveway, I saw several cars I recognized: my uncle's truck, my grandparents' sedan, even our family pastor's vehicle. Something was seriously wrong. Before I could even get out of my Jeep, my Uncle James, my father's younger brother and a construction contractor with a notorious temper, burst out of the front door. He yanked open my car door, grabbed me by my shirt, and slammed me against the side of the vehicle with such force that the wind was knocked out of me. "I'm going to kill you," he snarled, his face inches from mine, spittle hitting my cheeks as the smell of whiskey wafted from his breath. His eyes were wild with rage, something I'd never seen before, even during his worst outbursts. I could have easily broken free. James was in his 50s, out of shape, and I was a 23-year-old athlete in my prime, but I was too shocked to react. My father and another uncle pulled him off me, and my father pointed toward the house. "Inside, now." His voice was barely controlled and he wouldn't meet my eyes. As I walked up the front steps and into our living room, the scene that greeted me made my blood run cold. The room was packed with family members, my mother crying on the couch, both sets of grandparents looking grim, aunts, uncles, close family friends, and Emma, curled up against my grandmother, sobbing into her shoulder. The room fell completely silent when I entered, everyone staring at me with expressions ranging from horror to disgust. "What's happening?" I demanded, looking around the room for any clue. My mother finally looked up, her face twisted with a rage and disgust I'd never seen before. "How could you?" she whispered. "Your own sister." I stood there in complete confusion, looking from face to face for some explanation of what was happening. My father stepped forward, his normally composed demeanor completely gone. He looked like he wanted to physically tear me apart. "Emma told us everything," he said, his voice shaking with barely contained fury, "about how you've been coming into her room at night for years." The accusation hit me like a physical blow. I couldn't breathe. The room started spinning around me as I tried to process the monstrous allegation. "What? That's insane!" I finally managed to gasp out. "I never touched her!" Emma was sobbing harder now, clinging to my grandmother. "You said no one would believe me," she cried. "You said you'd hurt me if I told anyone. You said it was our secret." I was speechless with shock. "That's a lie!" I shouted, the initial shock giving way to anger and panic. "I never said or did any of those things. What is happening right now?" My Uncle James lunged at me again, but was held back by my father and another uncle. "My buddy's a cop," he growled. "You're going to prison, you sick bastard. They're going to love you in there." I tried desperately to defend myself, to make them see how ridiculous and baseless these accusations were, but it was like shouting into a void. No one was listening. Emma kept adding more fabricated details, claiming I first assaulted her when she was 10 and I was home from high school for winter break, that it had happened dozens of times since then, that I had threatened to hurt her and our parents if she ever told anyone. Every word out of her mouth was a complete fabrication, but my family was nodding, consoling her, and glaring at me with hatred and disgust. Then my father snapped. He had always been controlled, never violent, but something broke in him that day. He walked right up to me and hit me with a right hook that would have made professional boxers proud. It caught me square in the jaw, and I went down hard, tasting blood where my teeth had cut into the inside of my cheek. "Get your things and get out," he said, standing over me with his fist still clenched. "You're no son of mine." My mother had already packed some of my clothes in garbage bags, which were sitting by the door. My father grabbed my wallet, removing all the cards with his name on them, credit cards, health insurance cards, everything. "Dad, please," I begged, blood dripping from my split lip. "This isn't true. You've known me my entire life. You know I would never do something like this." But he wasn't listening. He grabbed me by my shirt, dragged me to the door, and literally threw me down the front steps. I landed hard on my shoulder, feeling something pop that would later turn out to be a partial dislocation. The bags with my clothes followed, then my lacrosse gear. "If you ever come near this family again," my father said with deadly calm, "I'll kill you myself." Then he slammed the door. I sat there on our manicured lawn, blood on my face, shoulder throbbing in pain, neighbors peeking through their windows at the commotion. My entire life had just imploded in less than an hour, and I had no idea why. I spent that night in my Jeep in the university parking lot, unable to process what had happened. Sleep was impossible as I replayed the scene over and over, trying to understand how Emma could do this to me, how my parents could believe her so completely without even questioning it or giving me a chance to defend myself. By morning, my jaw was swollen and purple, and my shoulder hurt so badly I could barely move my arm. I called my roommate, Tyler, who let me crash on our apartment couch while I tried to figure out what to do next. I spent the next days calling, texting, and emailing everyone in my family, grandparents, aunts, uncles, cousins, people who had known me my entire life. No responses except a single text from my father. "Contact us again and I'm filing a restraining order. You're dead to us." Tyler tried to help, suggesting I go to the police to file a report about my father's assault, to get ahead of the situation before Emma's accusations spread further. But I couldn't bring myself to do it. Some part of me still couldn't accept that this nightmare was really happening. I kept thinking my parents would come to their senses, realize how insane this all was, and reach out. And honestly, I was terrified. What if Emma didn't back down? What if the police believed her over me? How could I possibly prove I didn't do something that never happened? How do you prove a negative? 2 weeks later, I received an email from the university financial office. My tuition payment for the semester was overdue. My parents had canceled it mid-term. I rushed to the financial aid office, desperate to secure emergency loans, but without a co-signer and with minimal credit history, I was severely limited in my options. I had to drop most of my classes to part-time status, so I could work full-time just to afford even that reduced course load. My lacrosse coach was understanding at first, allowing me to stay on the team, but I missed so many practices because of my new job working security at a downtown hotel that I barely played anymore. My grades plummeted from Dean's List to barely passing. Friends started avoiding me as rumors spread throughout campus. Someone in my family had told someone, who told someone else, and soon whispers followed me everywhere. No one called me a predator to my face, but I saw how people looked at me, how conversations stopped when I entered rooms, how female classmates would subtly move away if I sat near them. The isolation was almost as devastating as the accusation itself. I went from being a popular, well-respected student-athlete to a pariah in a matter of weeks. 6 months after the accusation, my life had completely fallen apart. My Jeep's transmission failed, a $3,000 repair I couldn't possibly afford. Without reliable transportation, I lost my hotel security job and the delivery job I'd picked up to supplement my income. I was evicted from the apartment I'd been sharing with 3 other guys because I couldn't make rent. With nowhere else to go, I started sleeping in the university gymnasium storage room. Our lacrosse coach had given me the access code out of pity, and I would sneak in late at night after the facility closed, using my duffel bag as a pillow and taking showers in the locker room before the early morning cleaning staff arrived. I survived on 1 meal a day from the cafeteria, scraping by on what remained of my meal plan. Coach Reynolds found me there one night in February. The temperature outside was below freezing, and I was huddled in the corner of the storage room, wrapped in several sweatshirts and using an old practice mat as a makeshift bed. Instead of being angry, he sat down next to me on the floor. "Nathan, what the hell happened to you?" he asked, genuine concern in his voice. For the first time since that horrific day, someone actually wanted to listen. I told him everything. The accusation, my parents' reaction, being cut off financially, losing my vehicle, the apartment, everything. When I finished, he didn't say he believed me, but he didn't call me a liar either. He just nodded and sat in silence for a minute. "You can stay here until the end of the semester," he finally said. "After that, I'll help you figure something out." Coach Reynolds became my lifeline. He brought me a space heater and a proper air mattress for the storage room. He started inviting me to dinner at his house once a week, and his wife always packed enough leftovers to feed me for days afterward. It wasn't much, but it was something. Someone showing basic human kindness when everyone else had abandoned me. I managed to finish the academic year with a 2.2 GPA, narrowly avoiding academic probation, but my passion for lacrosse was gone. The fire that had driven me to excel had been extinguished by the daily struggle just to survive. Coach connected me with a summer job at an outdoor adventure program in Colorado, a wilderness therapy program for troubled teens. It was ironic, but the position paid cash, provided housing in a staff cabin, and included meals. That fall, I didn't return to Northeastern. I stayed with the wilderness program, becoming a full-time guide. The work was physically demanding, carrying heavy backpacks up mountains, teaching survival skills, building shelters, but it helped rebuild my strength. I put on muscle again, this time functional strength from actual labor rather than carefully planned gym routines. But at night, when the teens were asleep in their tents, I would often drink myself into oblivion with the other guides. On days off, I experimented with whatever substances were available: marijuana, mushrooms, MDMA, anything to numb the constant pain of having lost everything and everyone I loved because of a lie. After 8 months at the wilderness program, tragedy struck. One of the teens in my group, a 16-year-old boy named Justin, fell during a climbing exercise and suffered severe injuries. I was the lead guide that day, but I'd been nursing a brutal hangover from the previous night's drinking binge. My reaction time was slower than it should have been, my attention not fully on the safety protocols I'd performed hundreds of times before. Justin survived, but barely, with a spinal injury that would require months of rehabilitation. The program director called me into his office the next day. "Nathan, you're one of our best guides when you're focused," he said gravely. "The kids respect you. You know your stuff in the field. But you're becoming a liability. I can't have you responsible for these kids' lives when you're self-destructing like this." I was fired on the spot. I didn't argue or defend myself. I knew he was right. Justin's accident was a wake-up call, but not enough of one to pull me out of my downward spiral. I spent the next year living out of my new vehicle, a 1997 Honda Civic I'd purchased for $900 cash, working whatever jobs would hire me without asking too many questions about my background. Bouncer at bars, security at events, day labor on construction sites, any job where I could use my size and strength, and nobody cared about my past or why I had no references from before the wilderness program. I avoided women completely during this period. Avoided families, too. I would literally walk out of restaurants if a child sat too close to my table. The paralyzing fear of being accused again, of someone misinterpreting even the most innocent interaction, consumed me. I had recurring nightmares where I was in prison, other inmates discovering what I was falsely accused of, waking up in cold sweats with my heart pounding so hard I thought I was having a heart attack. One night I was working security at a college bar in Denver when I recognized a guy from Northeastern. He'd been on the basketball team while I was there, and unfortunately, he recognized me too. He started telling his friends who I was, what I'd supposedly done. By closing time, they were all giving me looks, making comments just loud enough for me to hear. Predator. Sick bastard. Someone should teach him a lesson. I tried to ignore it, focused on doing my job, escorting the last patrons out at 2 a.m. I was walking to my car when I got jumped in the parking lot. 3 guys from earlier had been waiting. They called me a pedophile, a predator, said they were going to make sure I couldn't hurt anyone else. I fought back hard, managed to break one guy's nose, but it was 3 against 1, and they had the element of surprise. The beating was brutal. 3 broken ribs, a fractured eye socket, dislocated shoulder, and a severe concussion. The guy with the broken nose must have panicked when a car pulled into the lot because they ran off. The driver called an ambulance. I spent 3 nights in the hospital before being released with no place to go, no health insurance, and a $63,000 medical bill I had no way of paying. The painkillers they prescribed barely touched the pain. I couldn't work with my injuries, which meant I couldn't earn money for food or gas. I slept in my car in Walmart parking lots, taking sponge baths in gas station bathrooms when I could manage to lift my arms without screaming in pain. After weeks of this existence, I reached my breaking point. It was raining heavily around 2 a.m. when I drove to an old bridge outside Denver. It was high enough that jumping would definitely be fatal. I parked my Honda, walked to the middle of the bridge through the downpour, and climbed over the railing despite the excruciating pain in my ribs with every movement. I stood there for what felt like hours, rain soaking through my clothes, staring down at the dark water below. My phone was in my hand. No messages, no calls, complete silence from my family for over 3 years now. No one was coming to save me. No one cared if I lived or died. I was utterly alone in the world, destroyed by a lie I couldn't disprove, with no hope of the nightmare ever ending. "Bit cold for a swim, don't you think?" The voice startled me so badly I almost slipped. I grabbed the railing with my good arm, pain shooting through my broken ribs, and turned to see an older man standing nearby. He was at least in his 70s, wearing a rain jacket and holding a fishing rod in one hand. "Go away," I said hoarsely, my voice barely audible over the rain. "Can't do that, son," he replied calmly, as if we were just having a casual conversation on a sunny day. "See, if I go away and you jump, that makes me responsible in a way." "It's not your problem," I muttered. "Became my problem when I saw you," he said, moving closer, his movements slow and non-threatening. "That's how life works sometimes. My name's Robert, retired Marine Corps, seen plenty of men at their breaking point. You want to tell me what's got you standing on the wrong side of this railing?" "You wouldn't understand," I said bitterly. "Try me," he responded simply. I don't know why, but I told him everything. The accusation, being disowned, the last 3 years of homelessness and despair. Maybe because I figured I'd be dead soon anyway. Maybe because he was a stranger who didn't immediately look at me like I was a monster. Or maybe because something in his weathered face reminded me of my grandfather, the only person in my family who might have believed me if he hadn't been suffering from Alzheimer's when it all happened. When I finished my story, Robert just nodded thoughtfully, then said something I'll never forget. "Son, you've been carrying this burden alone long enough. Put down the weight for one night. Come have a hot meal, dry clothes, and we'll talk about it with clear heads tomorrow." "Why would you help someone like me?" I asked suspiciously. "You don't know if I'm telling the truth." Robert's eyes were sharp even in the dim light. "Been reading men's faces for 50 years in combat and in peace. You're either telling the truth or you're the best damn liar I've ever met. Either way, dead is permanent. Food isn't." I could have ignored him, could have jumped anyway. Some days I wonder why I didn't. But something about his certainty, his calm in the face of my storm, made me climb back over that railing. Robert's house was small but immaculate, arranged with military precision, books perfectly aligned on shelves, shoes exactly parallel by the door. He gave me dry clothes that had belonged to his son, who I later learned had died in Afghanistan 12 years earlier. He made me take a hot shower while he cooked dinner. That night, I slept on Robert's couch and actually rested for what felt like the first time in years. The next morning, he made breakfast, eggs, bacon, and coffee so strong it could probably raise the dead. Then he made me an offer that would change the trajectory of my life. "I own a private security firm," Robert told me over breakfast. "Executive protection, event security, and some specialized work for high-profile clients. I need a young, strong man who can take orders and keep his mouth shut. Job comes with an apartment above the office until you get on your feet, health insurance, and a decent salary." "Why would you trust me with something like that?" I asked in disbelief. "You just met me. I was about to kill myself last night." Robert looked me directly in the eyes. "Because a man pushed to the edge who chooses to step back has something worth fighting for, even if he doesn't know it yet. And because if you screw me over, I know exactly how to find you." For the next 6 months, I lived in the small apartment above Robert's security firm office. He was a strict boss. 5 a.m. workouts, rigid rules, no drinking on work nights. But he was fair. He paid me well, taught me about financial management, proper business etiquette, and how to rebuild my life step by step. He also insisted I see a therapist, an old Vietnam veteran friend of his who specialized in PTSD. I resisted at first, but Robert wouldn't take no for an answer. "You've had your bell rung, son, and not just physically," he said firmly. "Need to get your head straight if you're going to work for me." The therapy helped gradually, teaching me that what happened wasn't my fault, that I didn't deserve it, that I wasn't broken beyond repair. I saved enough for my own apartment after 6 months. A small one-bedroom, nothing fancy. But it was mine. Clean, safe, a place to start rebuilding. Robert became the father figure I'd lost. He never pushed me to contact my family, never suggested I try to clear my name. He simply said, "Some battles aren't worth fighting. Focus on the war, building a life they can't take away from you." A year into working for Robert's security firm, he sent me to handle security at his niece's art gallery opening. He claimed it was a favor to his sister, but I realized later he was playing matchmaker. Olivia was nothing like I expected. Robert had described her as smart as a whip and doesn't take crap from anyone, which was accurate but incomplete. She was striking in an unconventional way, tall, athletic, with intense green eyes that seemed to look right through you, and dark hair styled in an asymmetrical cut that perfectly framed her face. She wasn't conventionally beautiful in a magazine cover way, but captivating, the kind of woman who commands attention simply by existing. We didn't hit it off immediately. She thought I was just some muscle-bound security guy with no brain. I thought she was a pretentious art snob. During the gallery event, I overheard her explaining an abstract painting to a potential buyer, rolling her eyes when they walked away without purchasing. "Not everyone gets it," I commented, not really intending to start a conversation. She looked me up and down, taking in my security uniform. "And you do?" I shrugged. No, but I'm not pretending to either. She almost smiled. Honesty, refreshing. Throughout the night, I caught Olivia watching me with curiosity as I performed my security duties, scanning the room, monitoring the entrances, keeping an eye on the more valuable artworks. I was being professional, alert but unobtrusive, as Robert had trained me. At the end of the evening, as I was doing final checks and the last guests were leaving, she approached me. "So, Uncle Robert says you're more than just muscle," she said directly. "Your uncle talks too much," I replied. She laughed, and it was genuine, not the forced social laugh I'd heard all night from patrons. Actually, he barely talks at all, which is why when he does, people listen. He says you've got a business background and you're taking specialized security certification courses. Guilty as charged, I admitted. Interesting combination. Tell me more. We ended up talking until 2 a.m. about everything except my past. Art, books, travel, music. She was brilliant, funny, challenging in all the right ways. She had strong opinions but listened to mine as well. When I finally said I needed to leave because I had an early client meeting, she handed me her business card. "I have a security issue at my condo. The locks need upgrading. Maybe you could give me a consultation." It was a transparent excuse, but I took it. That security consultation turned into dinner, which became movie nights, which evolved into weekend trips to nearby mountain towns. Olivia was unlike anyone I'd ever dated, fiercely independent, passionate about her work, but vulnerable in quiet moments. We both had walls up, but somehow found ways to let each other in gradually. For months, I avoided talking about my family, crafted vague stories when she asked, claiming my parents had died in a car accident and that I was an only child. Olivia knew I was hiding something significant, but didn't push. Robert, however, was more direct. "That woman is falling for you," he told me one day as we were planning security for an upcoming corporate event. "And you're falling for her. She deserves the truth before it goes any further." He was right, of course. So one night over dinner at my apartment, I told Olivia everything, the whole ugly story from beginning to end. I expected her to leave, to look at me differently, to have that seed of doubt that maybe Emma hadn't been lying. Instead, she reached across the table, took my hand, and said 3 simple words that broke me open. "I believe you." I broke down right there at the dinner table, sobbing like a child while she held me, letting years of pain and isolation pour out. 2 years after we met, I proposed to Olivia at the spot where we'd had our first real date, a small lookout point in the mountains outside Denver. I did it properly, down on one knee, ring in hand, heart pounding with nervousness and hope. Robert walked her down the aisle at our wedding, since her own father had passed away years before. We bought a modest house in a quiet neighborhood and began building the life I thought I'd lost forever. I completed my business degree through online courses and eventually became a partner in Robert's security firm. We expanded from local contracts to regional, then national, developing a reputation for professionalism and discretion that attracted high-profile clients. Olivia's art career flourished as well, her work appearing in major galleries and commanding impressive prices. We were talking about starting a family, something I never thought would be possible for me again. I was finally happy. Finally at peace. The nightmares became less frequent, and I could be around children without panicking. I even reconnected with a few old college friends who had reached out after hearing fragments of the truth through mutual connections. My previous life felt distant, like it had happened to someone else. I still thought about my family occasionally, wondered if they ever doubted Emma's story, if they ever regretted what they'd done. But I had accepted that chapter was closed. I had a new family now, people who chose me, who stood by me. That was enough, or so I thought. It was an ordinary Tuesday in April when everything changed again. I was in my office reviewing security protocols for an upcoming assignment, a tech billionaire visiting Denver for a conference who needed discreet protection. My assistant buzzed me on the intercom. "Sir, you have a call on line 1. Woman wouldn't give her name but says it's a family emergency." My first thought was Olivia or Robert. I picked up immediately. Nathan speaking. Silence, then a sob. Nathan, it's Mom. My body went cold. I hadn't heard her voice in 7 years. What do you want? I asked, my voice flat, emotionless. Please don't hang up, she begged. We need to talk to you. It's important. We haven't spoken in 7 years, I replied coldly. Nothing could be that important. Emma confessed, she said, her voice breaking. She lied about everything. She made it all up. The world stopped. 7 years of pain, of rebuilding my life from nothing, of nightmares and panic attacks and therapy, all because of a lie I'd always known it was. Nathan? Are you there? I hung up without another word. I walked out of my office, told my assistant to cancel my meetings, and drove straight to Robert's house. After I explained what had happened, he just nodded thoughtfully and asked, "What do you want to do?" "I don't know," I admitted. "Yes, you do," he replied sagely. "You just don't know if it's the right thing." He was right. Part of me wanted to ignore them completely, to keep them cut out of my life forever. Another part needed answers, needed to hear the truth admitted to my face. Olivia felt the same when I told her about the call that night. "You need closure," she said, holding my hand tightly. "But whatever you decide, I'm with you, Nathan. This doesn't change anything between us. I'm still here, no matter what." For 2 weeks, I ignored the flood of calls and texts that started coming in from my mother, my father, and even relatives who had shut me out years before. I talked through my options with my therapist, weighing what I needed versus what I could handle emotionally. Finally, I decided I needed to face them, but on my terms. I texted my mother, "Public place, coffee shop on Main Street, Sunday 2 p.m. Just you, Dad, and Emma. I'll have people with me. One chance only." Sunday arrived, and Robert insisted on coming as backup. Olivia stayed by my side, gripping my hand so tightly it almost hurt. We arrived early, took a table in the back corner where I could see all entrances and exits, an old security habit that never goes away. My stomach was in knots, and part of me still expected them not to show, or for this to be some elaborate trap. Olivia kept checking on me, her eyes full of concern. "We can leave any time," she reassured me. "Just say the word." They arrived precisely at 2 p.m. My mother looked older than I remembered, her hair more gray than brown, face lined with stress and